Proverbs chapter 26. I'm going to begin reading in where we left off at our last message here about a month ago in verse 17, and I'm going to read down through verse 22. He that passes by and meddles with strife belonging not to him is like one that takes a dog by the ears. As a man who casts firebrands, arrows, and death, so is the man that deceives his neighbor and says, Am I not in sport? Where no wood is, there the fire goeth out. So where there is no talebearer, the strife ceases. As coals are to burning coals, and as wood to strife, so is a contentious man to kindle strife. The words of a talebearer are as wounds. They go down into the innermost parts of the belly. One of the fascinating thing about the book of Proverbs is that it sounds strange to put it this way, but it's just so true. When you see the principles that are involved here, there's no denying it. It applies to every area of life. These proverbs here are picking up on the concepts that we saw earlier about the fool in the first 10 verses, about the sluggard that we saw in verse 13 through 16, the meddler and the gossiper and the flatterer and some of those. But I just want to take verse 16 through verse 22 and show you there's another principle involved here. One that's just, you can write it down and put it up on your wall and live by it. It's easier to get into something than it is to get out of something. Boy, if we could learn that lesson. It is so easy to get into something. You don't need to put any effort whatsoever, but getting out of something's another matter entirely. And that's the kind of thing that your grandmother told you, your parents told you, your wife told you, sometimes even your kids tell you, and you just go ahead, no, this time it's different, this time I can handle it, and we get burned time after time after time. I don't care, there are a lot of corollary truths to this. Truths like you better count the cost before you get involved with something. You'll look before you leap, and some of those. But I just want to look at this truth tonight. It's easier to get involved with something than it is to get out of it. Look at verse 17. The one that passes by and meddles with strife that belongeth not to him. That word meddles, it's interesting. That isn't the word in the Hebrew. What's happened here is that there are two letters that have been switched between the Hebrew translation and the Greek translation, and our Bible followed the Greek translation, not the Hebrew. It's very close, the two words are. One word means to get involved, and the other word means to get mad about something. The concept here is that somebody sees something going on that's none of his business. That's what it means, it belongeth not to him. It's none of his business, but he gets mad. He gets hurt because of it. He picks up that hurt from somebody else, and he gets involved in the situation. It's none of his business, nobody hurt him, but he gets mad about something that someone did to someone else, and then he gets involved. Oh, that happens so often in Christian circles. Sometimes it falls under that heading of Christian sympathy. We care so much for people. Sometimes it's simply because they're our relatives. And when they feel a hurt, we feel a hurt. When somebody does something to one of us, we can't learn that one. Somehow, when anything happens, we feel it's got to spread. It's just got to spread through everyone. And the truth is, you can't pick up a hurt for another person. You can't do it. Just because two people are fighting doesn't mean that you have to get involved in that fight. Because someone does something that's wrong, why do you have to take up the cause of the person who's been wrong? Why do you feel like you have to get involved? Husbands, there are some times when we shouldn't get involved in our wife's disputes. Wives, there are some times when you can't get involved in your husband's disputes. Some very practical times that I think have to do with this. What happens at your husband's work? Maybe if sometimes you were able, except for Veronica who's there, you're thinking, well, how does this apply to me? Maybe sometimes it's better, instead of you feeling your husband's hurts and getting involved and getting mad at his boss or getting mad at his coworkers, maybe it's better if you have a home that's a little bit of a refuge, where the husband can come home and just leave that. How many times have situations got worse because a man comes home and his wife is intimately involved with work, and what went on at work gets built up and gets magnified and gets pushed all out of shape. Or maybe it's bad enough and he just needs some relief and he doesn't even know it. And sometimes we can feel for the person we're married to, and maybe it's better if we keep a distance sometimes. Men, if your wife is mad at someone, maybe it's a good time for you to step back and say, that's her business. I love you, dear, but what's going on over there? I want what's best for you. I want what's best for the church, but I don't necessarily want to get involved. It's funny how, we have enough family in this church, so this can really happen. Family to family to family. Sometimes what happens to our kids doesn't need to be our affair. Sometimes we've got to let our kids take their lumps and learn their lessons without picking up hurts. Or vice versa. What happens to our parents doesn't need to be our affair. These are some difficult lessons to learn. The situation with the church I grew up in, where my parents went through a situation where they felt hurt by the church and left. But it was still our home church. And every time that we came back and we attended the church, here was a church I grew up in when I was a boy, a church that we had connections with and we knew people. There'd be a little awkwardness there. And it was very, very hard to say, well, I'm not saying they're right. I'm not saying they're wrong. All I'm saying is my connections and your connections are different. I don't know about you, but I don't expect all of my friends to be friends with one another. And minding our own business is simply saying, was I hurt? Was that something that I should meddle in? Was that something that I should take up? It doesn't mean that there wasn't something done. It means, why are you getting involved? What is your purpose in getting involved? What is the direct business that it is of yours? He gives a good illustration. He says it's like a guy who picks up a dog by the ears. Didn't Lyndon Johnson do that once? Am I correct? And remember way back when that he did that once, picked up the old... But when you stop and think about it, you pick up a dog by the ears and it gets mad. Now what do? You can't let him go, right? That's the whole point of this. You're not going to let... what are you going to do? Hand him to somebody? Oh, yeah, right, But you got involved in it and you got two hands on it and now you can't put it down. So many times Christians in churches realize I got involved with it and they follow it right to the bitter end and they can't put it down anymore. When people take up a hurt for somebody else, those are the hurts that are hardest to put down. Sometimes when somebody has hurt you, it's easy to distance yourself and it's easy to say, okay, well, I get right with the Lord. Lord, I shouldn't feel hurt. Lord, I ought to forgive everybody and I don't care what was done. Yeah, I've done worse to you than anybody's done to me, and I'm just not going to feel hurt. I'm going to forgive the person and forget about it. But when you've got yourself involved in a dispute with other people, you can't change their heart. And it gets deeper and deeper, and one hurt piles on another. It never stays with just one thing. And it's all growing, and you've got your hands involved in it. I don't know how many times as a pastor it's been hard for me to say, you can get involved with that, but you can't get involved with that. That's your business, but that's not your business. When the Bible says that it's easy to get your hands on something, it really is. But it's hard to take your hands off of stuff. And we've got to learn that going in. Once you got the dog by the ears, what advice do you give the person? My first piece of advice was, I wouldn't let go right away. Once you've got it there, what do you say? Just let him go. Oh, yeah, right, Hold him out over the edge of the house and let him go maybe. But, I wouldn't just let him go. And when people get involved in these strifes, all of a sudden it gets messy. And you got to try this, you got to try that. Listen, The Bible says when you get your hands on something that's none of your business, that's when you get burned. And we've got to learn what's our business and what isn't our business. It's interesting. The next example is a little bit different, but it's got the same principle. As a madman who casts his firebrands and arrows and death, so is the man that deceives his neighbor and says, am I not in sport? The idea is somebody who throws around his words real easy. He says little things that are deceptive. He's purposefully beguiling people. Little lies and little things that mislead a person. And then when they find out, oh, I was only kidding. You can't take everything I say seriously. But you can't pull out sometimes. We use our tongue so easily and so lightly. And there are some of the things that we do that we started and we can't pull out of them. There used to be a law on the books that was called breach of promise. Breach of promise was if you went to a girl and said, I'm going to marry you, there were two penalties for that. One that would be exacted by the state in court. The other one by her father, on the back porch. Breach of promise was you don't utter words simply like, I love you. Oh, if we could teach our teens and our young people to say, that's a word, a phrase that's wonderful, but it shouldn't come out of your mouth real easy. Because people say that so quickly. I love you, I love you, I love you. You talk to your kids in school, you find 12 and 13-year-olds who are talking about going with one another. So-and-so's going with one another. What do you mean going with one another? Christian day schools are the worst for this, I think, sometimes, because it's such a small environment. It really is. And everybody's right there, and we've encouraged our kids that, you ought to keep with the Christian kids, and you ought to try to find your friends, and everything kind of pushes in on one another. And you find out they're always talking about, what do you mean going with one another? Have they ever gone out together? Well, no, but they're kind of going with one another. What do you mean going? Well, tell me the progress here. Well, there's kind of going with one another, which as far as I can tell, that means you've spoken to them, and they've answered you back. Then there's the step where you then go out on a date together, which follows going together. Then there's a step where you're going steady, which basically means that if any other girl talks to him, you get mad at them. And then there's a step where you get serious. Boy, who knows the rules? When does one thing become another? Well, part of the problem is we use these words like going steady and commitment real quickly. And there has to be a line where we tell our children, a commitment is something that you better know before you make. I'm not saying don't make commitments. I'm saying you better know what you're saying before you make that. You better know when you tell somebody something how it's going to be received by them. And sometimes we deceive people without trying to be evil about it. We deceive them to make them feel good. Well, just let them think that. It's interesting, the Bible describes it as a madman. Somebody like this guy who was on the subway who just opened up and shot everybody around him. No consequences, no thought, just do it. Each of these things they're describing are little things that start big fires. That word firebrand is actually the word for a spark. It's not talking about a guy with a big torch, running around. Just a little spark. Just a little spark. An arrow. Well, the point about an arrow is that it's supposed to go in easy and come out hard. That's why the thing is shaped. I don't know if I can make an arrow here. Used to be able to make a paper airplane really well, even with a bulletin, which has gotten me into trouble on more than one occasion. Okay. I don't know if I can do this correctly, but let me see here. Terrible thing is I'm convinced my sons can make one quicker than I could. You got to have a point on an arrow. Think about it. Why the point? Because it's got to start small. It's got to start small. That's what makes something sharp. It's so small that it hardly intrudes when it goes in. You can get a paper cut and hardly know it when it first starts. Better not do it. Oh, I got the blunt edge here. Always handle the paper by the blunt edge. That's the rule. You can get a paper cut, and it's so thin and so... Why? Because they start so easy. The same with a razor. It starts so easy. and then it goes so quick. The way that it's shaped is it almost pulls it in. It pulls it in, but once you get past that head, you're not pulling it out again. You ever seen the hunting arrows that they use for deer? I don't know that I could hunt with an arrow after looking at those. You can't get those things out, and they're made so that once they go in, you don't need the force of, how you shoot the deer? Well, the hunting arrows are made so that once you don't need the force of the initial shot to kill the deer. That as the deer moves, the muscles will make the thing go in farther and farther and farther. It might sound cruel, but the idea is, of course, once you shoot the deer, you want to kill it. You don't want just to have it hanging out the side, and the idea isn't to injure the deer, the idea is to kill it. And as it works its way deeper and deeper, but that's what an arrow does. It starts out real small. It doesn't mean anything by it, just a little intrusion. Then deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, and almost seems to go in on its own. That's the whole concept here. A madman is the kind of person who would handle those things easily and lightly. What you can do with your tongue. It's easy to say something, and it's hard to take it back again. To say something that, how many times has that happened? You've said something, the wrong thing at the wrong time, and then you've realized, Men, how many times that happened with your wife? Just the wrong thing at the wrong time. The trouble is you didn't mean anything by it. Oh boy. So what? It's out there. You shot it. Ching! And it's like, after you shoot the arrow, you try to catch it. And you stand about as much chance, bringing that one back as you do catching that old arrow there. Because once it's gone out of your lips, it's like an arrow. And you're not going to bring it back again. The hardest thing in the world is to control your mouth. That's what we're going to talk about more and more in James. Well, the Bible teaches that it's easy to put something out and to send a dart into a person, and it's hard to pull it back again. I can remember something that I said to my father when I was 17 years old, and he took it the wrong way. Literally took it the wrong way. Just something to do with a job, and to this day, he still remembers what I said. And my heart was innocent in what I said, but it makes no difference. If I hadn't said that, it wouldn't be around. And I don't care how I intended it. I don't care that I intended it good. I wish I'd never said it. I wish I kept my mouth shut. A wish that I have had occasion to wish over and over and over again. It's easy to say something. It's impossible to pull it back. It's easy to do damage with your lips. And it's almost impossible to undo the damage you do with your lips. It says here, it's interesting, where there's no wood, the fire goes out. And where there's no talebearer, the strife ceases. What he's trying to point, he's leading into the next illustration, is that the talebearer is the real problem here. A person who hears something and passes it on, and hears something and passes it on. And so it's not the doing of something that is the real cause, and it's not the hearing of something that's the start of it, it's the talebearer in the middle. Well, you'd think, well, that's simple. All you got to do is cut out the talebearer. Don't listen to the talebearer, right? I mean, should be easy. I'm not going to listen to the talebearer. I'm not going to listen to the gossip. That's what a talebearer is. He hears something, and it's something bad, by the way, and the intent of gossip is to share something that's bad. It's very hard to church to know when it's gossip and when it isn't. But one rule of thumb is, by the telling of it, is it going to cause harm to somebody? Is it going to make somebody think poorly about someone else? Is it going to hurt somebody's reputation? When somebody does something, why do you tell anybody about it? Because as soon as they know about it, it has hurt that person's reputation. And that's one of the criteria for gossip. If you can tell something to someone and it's not going to hurt that person's reputation, then that's one criterion for it really wasn't gossip. Sometimes Christians never share hurts and they never share problems because they're afraid it'll be gossip. Well, the criterion is the person going to be hurt by it? The talebearer is the one who takes something and tells somebody else with an intent to hurt this one. So the answer is, I'm just not going to listen to gossip. Well, listen to the verse 22. The words of a talebearer are as wounds. They go down into the innermost parts of the belly. They get right down inside of you. You can't get rid of them. These talk shows they have on TV, they have special sections for gossip. Just for gossip. Let's gossip. Let's tell every filthy, rotten fact about all those filthy, rotten people who inhabit that filthy, rotten place called Hollywood. And I want to hear. How do you think the Inquirer and the this and that, the Examiner, how do you think they make their money? Everybody wants to know rotten stuff that other people are doing. And the worse it is, there's that little delicious sense of horror. Oh, he is bad, isn't he? I thought he was bad. I didn't know he was that bad. Oh, another one. And there's just something about that. Oh, I knew. I always suspected the guy. His voice was too high anyways. Something wrong with that guy, or she always did wear too much makeup. And we just love to hear these things. If you have a different version of the Bible, a New American Standard or a New International, they're going to translate that differently, because we found that word wounds that was translated and thought to be translated that way in texts from that same period, the word means a morsel, a piece of chocolate that just slides right down, something that's so easy to take. The little candies that sit in the dish? Some of them look real good. Our kids found out some of those Christmas candy look real good, but then you go to eat it, it's like, boy, some of it just, and I love some of those. There's that Christmas candy that's hard, and it's red on the outside, then white, and there's a little flour in the very center. You ever seen those? And the flour goes all the way through? Oh, I love those. But to buy those, you got to buy the rest of those stuff that just, tiny little green and yellow candies that look like they'll taste great. Once you put it in your mouth, you don't know what to do with it. We went to a funeral, and when we were at the funeral, my son Colin made the mistake. Can I tell this story? Yeah, made the mistake. He goes into the other room, and it's how in a small town the funeral parlors are. It's the man's house, and the parlor is actually his parlor, and right next door was his living room. And so everybody was kind of spreading out, and he saw this big dish of candy, and it was kind of reddish, greenish candy, and actually it was I don't know what color to call it. It was kind of like an orange, purplish candy. It's about this big. It looks like a little pillow is what it looks like, that kind of candy. And so Colin's in there, and I see him kind of looking, and I see his hand strain over there, and the funeral director, Mr. Dewey, says, "Oh, go ahead, try some." So he grabs a whole bunch of it. He never grabs just one. He grabs a whole bunch of it, sticks some of it in his mouth, and I see the look. And I got you again with the funeral director's candy, didn't they? I do. So some candy, and he had no place to get rid of that candy. That was what was great. You just put an arm around him and make him suffer, standing there. I want to tell you, though, candy goes in real easy. Goes in, just something about it. It slides down so well. And we reach out. There's something inside of us that just the look of it, just the smell of it. I get these little Hershey's things that come in little squares or little rectangles. There's a whole different assortment packing like that. All you got to do is open one up, and Elizabeth can smell it from half the house away. Chocolate? Somebody here have chocolate? Did you get any chocolate? You're trying to hide it and you can't. And the smile, that comes. That's what gossip is. Our soul has a part of it that the things that we abhor and are frightened with fascinate us. There's a part of us, that's why horror films are there. The things that people hate the most, there's a little bit of fascination with. Horror films, of course, take things that are just wretched and violent and fool with that. But there are some things, little things, some of the humor we listen to. It's hard to listen to humor. A lot of times the humor has a little edge to it, it's just off color, just that much, but there's a part of us wants to hear it, just to hear that little side of things. And gossip is the same way. Some of the things and the terrible things that happen, we want to know. And it's not just curiosity. There's a fascination with the bad side of life and the things that are happening. That's why there's a reason. It's not just that there are bad things happening in the world. There's a reason why news has to cover disaster. People do not want to know what happened after a hurricane. They want to see what happened. People do not want to know that there was an accident that happened out on the road. They want to see a picture of it. And when you get on the news knows that. They have to give people what they want to see. They're not presenting the broad picture of everything that happened during the day. They're not going to tell you the facts and the important things. They have two criterion. They're driven by what they consider to be their purpose as a newscaster, and they have a purpose and a philosophy. Usually it's liberal, but they're also driven by what sells. And people watch the news that shows them pictures of fires and accidents and horrible things. Christians are the same way. There's a part of us that makes gossip go in real easy, and it doesn't go out. Once you hear a fact about somebody, true or untrue, it's always in your mind. Young fellas seem to have a terrible time always with pornography. And you tell them that once that picture gets in there, it's not going out. It's going to hurt you for years to come. Gossip is the same way. Gossip is moral pornography. It's hearing something you shouldn't be hearing. It's exactly the same as pornography is visually. That's what gossip is. It's hearing something that you shouldn't be hearing. Sure, it's there. But once it gets inside, you're not getting it out. And I think that's what the words of a talebearer are like dainty morsels. They're like candy. They go down to the innermost parts of the belly and they stay there. It goes in real easy, but getting it out is another matter. And we've got to remember that our minds, you may think you're losing control and that you don't remember things, but your mind will still fix on certain things. As you get older, you'll find, and in certain cases, as people get older, they get much more childlike. And they'll fix on one thing and one thing and one thing, and they won't let go of it. And it's part of being old. You know, my wife tells me it started 20 years ago for me, just let it go. Well, sometimes it doesn't happen. But the truth is that it does happen to everybody. Things go in real easy, and they don't get out easy. And we have to learn as Christians that we've got to stop it before it happens. Every one of these, you can't call it back. Once you've heard that gossip, you can't say, well, I didn't hear that. I'm not going to think about that. I've never seen this happen in the juries that I've been in, but on TV they always show where somebody stands up, some lawyer stands up and says something he shouldn't, and the judge turns to the jury and says, you'll disregard that. Oh, yeah, sure, they'll disregard that. Oh, I'll pay no attention to that. Once it's inside of you, and that's what it means. See, that's how the talebearer works. That little spark, he is not simply starting a fire. That fire starts a fire. He's spreading it around, because once something's on fire, how do you stop it? Well, that's what the Bible teaches, that things are easy to get into and hard to get out of. And that's the world we live in. And we have to learn the lessons, and we've got to start applying these. And these are the kinds of lessons that you can't do anything about afterwards. It doesn't do any good to say, I told you so. It doesn't do any good to come to a family that's torn because people have been getting involved in strife when it could have stayed between two family members. Why does that need to happen? Because those two people are on fire and flame, why does that need to spread? Why couldn't the family have just said, we love you both, and that's your problem? And that's your problem. You two work that out. That's not our problem. How come people cannot learn some of these lessons about speaking things so freely and hurting others, or listening so freely? I think we really need to have a commitment beforehand to say, I'm going to stop it before it happens, because it's too late afterwards. Let's pray, shall we? Oh, Father, I want to praise you tonight for your word. I pray that it would take heart, or take root inside my heart. That, Father, I might be more far thinking, that I might avoid some of these things. And that, Father, such foolish hurts and such foolish involvements we'd learn to stay away from. That, Father, there'd be real wisdom practiced by the members of this church and by our families, and that the blessings we would have were because we're like your Son, Jesus Christ, in whom there was no guile. And what we say and do, we do in Jesus' name.